Okay, Rowena, the floor is yours. I did want to, I loved your description. Sorry, I hope you'll forgive me for reading for a second. Rowena has been living on the internet and scrutinizing websites since she was a small child. So naturally, she became a product designer at Liberty Mutual, where she is mainly focused on creating better, more intentional employee experiences. She aims to create products that are open to as many people as possible, enjoys growing her skills in the design, content, and development work of this entails. I really liked that description. So thank you for contributing that.
Thanks, Julia.
Okay, all yours.
Okay, before I share, I'm just going to interrupt myself and post the link to that product design lead job I mentioned.
Thank you.
And I'll start sharing. Hopefully. Okay. Okay. Oh, didn't think this would be here. Oh, all right. Sorry. So, hello. Thanks everyone for coming tonight. My name is Rowena, and I'll be talking about accessibility, inclusion, and how you can make products more accessible in your day-to-day job. Whoops. So I just wanted to start out by saying welcome to all the different people who might be here. I stole this idea from a different talk, so credits to that mystery person I stole this from. So I want to welcome anyone who is here from New Hampshire and anyone who's here from elsewhere, including far off places like Mumbai. Thank you so much. It's amazing that we have people across like all these different time zones. I saw Nebraska, I think I saw Houston. So thank you for interrupting your dinner or your maybe your workday, or maybe it's even just later in the evening to come and spend some time with us and learn about accessibility. That's very much appreciated. Thank you to the familiar faces that I see in the, well, I guess familiar names in the participant list. Thanks so much for your support. And sorry, you have to listen to my voice again, I guess. And to anyone who's new to me, I guess. Thank you so much for coming. I'm glad that you found this through NHUXPA and that this resonated with you. And then speaking of NHUXPA, welcome to those who are joining for the first time. We used to have in-person meetings like way back in the day. So I hope to see you guys at an in-person meeting at some point. And for those who've joined many times before this, you might remember those in-person meetings. And thank you for coming to this virtual one. For those who have spent some time in UX, welcome. And if you know, if you have experience in accessibility, I hope that you'll still get something from this talk. And I'd love any feedback on like anything I've missed or things that maybe I should have covered that I didn't. And for those who are starting their UX career, welcome. I think you're embarking on a great journey. And I am sharing stuff that I wish I had known in the beginning of my career. So I think, well, hopefully this will be helpful for you as you start your first UX role. I think accessibility is still something, while it's getting more, traction is not really the right word. It's definitely a hot topic right now. But I think there's not, it can get pretty intimidating to try to like wade through all the different guidelines and whatnot. And so I think you're, as a like beginner to UX, you wouldn't be very far behind a lot of people, I would say. And to those who are excited and here, thank you for nerding out about accessibility with me. And for those who may not be so excited, maybe you're a little anxious about accessibility. I hope that I can kind of dispel that fear a bit. There is definitely a lot out there. And what I'm covering here is definitely not like everything ever. But my intention is to kind of just bring awareness, general awareness of accessibility and things that you can do starting tomorrow. Oh, and also for those of you who are not in UX, who are here, thanks for being a great design ally. So with that, I'll introduce myself quickly. So I'm a product designer at Liberty Mutual, and my connection to NHUXPA is I used to work and live in Dover, and was also often in the Portsmouth office. And I then moved to the Boston office, still with Liberty, and my team does research and design, sorry, for employee experiences. And as I mentioned earlier, for the past couple of years, I've been focusing on the developer experience space. So helping the developers at Liberty do their jobs, well, like creating tools to help them do their jobs more effectively. I'm not writing their code for them. Most recently, most recently I worked on Accessibility First Certainly, which is a digital first insurance platform backed by Liberty. It was a like 3-month stint where I was able to focus on accessibility, and that was a really cool and good experience. Aside from that, for the past year or so, I've also been contributing to digital accessibility initiatives at Liberty, because it's definitely, we are getting more and more funding and interest in accessibility. And so there have been different like company-wide initiatives that have popped up. But with all that, like I'm certainly not, the foremost accessibility expert or anything. So what I'm sharing is just some learnings I've had and kind of fundamentals of accessibility that hopefully will be easy to digest. So here are some assistive technologies I use. And assistive technology is basically just something that like helps you make your life better in some way. Very scientific definition there. But so I wear glasses. I'm not wearing them right now because I only need them for distance. Glasses is a pretty common one. But I also have prescription sunglasses, which are one of my favorite items. Like, I don't know how I could drive without them. I highly recommend them if you wear glasses, because they're great. And speaking of driving, I also have a car seat cushion because I'm really short, and I like it's hard for me to drive without it, because I'm like sort of half and not sitting comfortably in the seat, and I can't adjust the height of the seat. I don't know if cars nowadays allow you to adjust like the vertical height, but I drive an old Honda Fit. I also think it's funny that I bought this Formula One cushion because it was on sale, but also because it has a good contrast with my Honda Fit. And so those are things that I use like because I have to. And for things that I use sort of because I prefer it, I use captions basically whenever I can. I just like to read, but also it allows me to enjoy media in different languages. So this screenshot is from Parasite, which is a great Korean movie, and I don't speak Korean, so captions helped me enjoy the movie. And I think that one is pretty common, even if you don't necessarily like love captions. Sometimes you can't have the sound on too loud, and so you might use captions in those cases. And then a digital one I use is Google Assistant sometimes. Again, mostly when I'm in my car, I guess, when I'm trying to like change the song, but it doesn't work super well for me. That's why I only sometimes use it, among other reasons. But yeah, I'm curious if there are any assistive technologies that you use that you would like to share. Feel free to share in the chat or out loud if you'd like.
I hadn't really thought about things that like a car cushion seat that as assistive technology. So along those lines, I had to just get a footrest because I'm at my desk way too much and I was starting to get just lower back pain and everything else because I'm old now. So I'm rocking a footrest.
Yeah.
I listen to audiobooks instead of reading because I have like a processing problem that I have a really hard time reading written information. So audiobooks are the way that I can learn much better now. Alexis mentioned Google Drive as an assistive technology. Definitely agree. And then Tiffany says, use Google Assistant sometimes to ask for weather and prescription sunglasses. And Fei Pu, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing, recently found out about bionic reading. Amazing for neurodivergent peeps. I cannot wait to try that. Thank you for the reminder.
Ooh,
Have you seen that yet? It's a different, it changes the weight of different parts of the word to help you move between the different words in the sentence a lot easier. This is super basic as much as I understand of it right now, but it looks really cool and helpful.
Wow. That's definitely exciting. Yeah, there are all these new technologies coming out all the time, and it's really cool to see that. Thanks for sharing. That's one I didn't know about.
I'll bring up one. This is Allison. Constantly exploring my mental health, etc. And like many people right now, exploring like, do I have ADHD? Is that the cause of a lot of my things in the past? Haven't been diagnosed yet, but I've been learning that I have this classic symptom where it's if I'm not with people, they're not real. So that makes me late for a lot of things because if I'm with someone, I'm going to be like, everything's all about this person. And so a technique that I've learned that has been like really helpful recently is setting an alarm on my phone so that I actually remember to check the time because otherwise time is just irrelevant. And I've learned that that's really helpful for a lot of people with ADHD. And so I always thought I was just late, but there's actually this root cause that could very well be neurological rather than just like a quirk that I have. And I think a lot of people have very similar things as they're exploring and learning about their mental health. So yeah, definitely very helpful and very real impact on the people around me. So
Thanks for sharing, Allison. That definitely resonates with me. Yeah, sometimes I feel like time isn't real.
Al and I are agreeing
too.
with everything in the chat as well. Yes.
Well, thanks everyone for sharing. I will go on to the next slide. So just some background on accessibility. About 1 billion people, or 15% of the world's population, lives with some form of disability, according to the WHO, the World Health Organization. And that number is increasing due to a rise in chronic health conditions and also just aging populations, demographics. And so, of course, that also means like in terms of, so I work in like employee experience. And of course, that means that like some of these people could be like my coworkers or your coworkers or just anyone you work with. So that's why accessibility matters. Like it affects a lot of people. And then also almost everyone is likely to experience some form of disability, whether temporary or permanent at some point in life. So it's not like just one fixed thing that doesn't change. It's kind of a question of like, it's not if, but when. And so like the more we can make things accessible, the more people will be helped like at any point in time. There are different types of disabilities. I've listed a couple here that are most relevant to like digital accessibility concerns, which are visual, hearing, motor, cognitive, and vestibular, which is like sensitivity to motion. And as we go through some of the items today, it will pertain to people with these types of disabilities. But as I was saying, disability isn't like one fixed thing where it's like you either like have a disability forever or you don't have a disability. You can think of it kind of more as like a spectrum. And if you solve for somebody with a permanent disability, you're actually solving for many different scenarios and situations and like people in those situations. So one example is hearing loss. You can have permanent hearing loss, and that could be because of like just noise that like loud noise that you hear without hearing protection. Could be from aging, it could be hereditary. You could just be born without hearing. And so obviously that's a permanent case. But you could also have temporary hearing loss, where let's say you went to a show, you didn't wear earplugs, and maybe like a day or two later, your ears are still ringing. And that would go away, of course, that's why it's temporary, but for that time, you're still experiencing some form of hearing loss. And there's also situational disability where, let's say you're at the show and you have difficulty hearing a friend because it's too loud in there. So PSA here, please wear earplugs at shows. But yeah, really the main message is in all of these cases, if you're designing something like captions, for example, that would help somebody in all of these situations, and not just like the smaller percentage of people who have the permanent disability. And so that's why solving for one is also solving for many. And if we recontextualize disability, we don't have to think of disability as a personal health condition. We can think of it as mismatched human interactions between individuals with health conditions and personal or environmental factors. Then it makes it easier when we think of it this way and not like defining disability as just like something somebody has, but rather like the mismatch between that person and their environment. Then we can start to see ways that that you might design for accessibility instead of thinking of it as like, oh, so this person has a health condition and we can't really like help them with our digital product. Instead, we can think of ways that we might fix that mismatch in interaction. And I took this from a book called Mismatch: How Inclusion Shapes Design by Kat Holmes, and I highly recommend this book. So what can we do to design inclusive digital products? I basically took the next couple slides from this checklist, and I'm going to be like going through this checklist. It is on, sorry. So the checklist is part of WebAIM, which is Web Accessibility in Mind. This is a great resource for accessibility tools. But they have this checklist for just like important principles of accessible design to keep in mind. And like, I think this is a really great starting point for just checking your products for accessibility. And that is why I'm going to be going through this. It's a little ironic that they made this like so one of the things is not to use Truetext instead of images of text. Obviously this infographic is an image of text, but they also have the text version below. So that's how they like support both. I think this is a good example too, where like there are some cases where you might need to have information, text in an image for whatever reason, but they provide some sort of text alternative. And so that's one way to deal with that. Okay, so back to my slides. So I basically am going to go through the guidelines, but there were some that I like changed, or I switched around the order of some of them and I added one, I believe. So the first two are around structure. And so for the structure of a web page, plan heading structure early, ensure all content and design fits into a logical heading structure. So what I'll be doing is I'll like show some tools as I'm going through this. So you can see like the tools kind of in action. Can someone give me a website?
Uh-oh, do we want to say NHUXPA.org?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's be brave. And get some free insight. Thank you.
All right.
Whoever touches it last, Rowena has to fix it.
I'm sure it's gonna be great, don't worry. So plan heading structure early. For headings, so this is related to like the HTML of the page, and there are 6 heading levels, H1 through H6, and these heading levels kind of act as like, you can think of them as sort of like a table of contents where, let's say the H1 is this title, and then the H2 is what is NHUXPA, for example. And the point of having these headings is it's not for like styling or anything. It comes with styling, but which is kind of the confusing part. But really they're supposed to be for structure. And I can show you how you can check that. So WebAIM has a tool called WAVE, which is Web Accessibility Evaluation Tool, I think. And so there are a lot of browser extensions, a lot of Chrome extensions that you can use to check things. So I'm using Wave right now, and I wanted to look at the structure. So I was talking about the headings, and I mentioned this might be an H1, which it is. So one thing about headings is you should only have one H1 per page, because that's like the H1 should be the main point of the page. And then the rest of it kind of goes, like I mentioned, like a table of contents. So you should be able to like look at the headings and like understand the point of the page from the headings. So there are some things that like maybe shouldn't be headings that are made into headings. Not here, but like sometimes you see like paragraphs that get made into headings because making it a heading makes like the font bigger, which is not really appropriate. But the reason that you would want to do this is for the benefit of screen readers. because a screen reader user could use heading levels to get a gist of a page. There are different ways that a screen reader user could navigate, but one way could be through headings. So you could like listen to what all the headings are on a page, and like, you know, determine whether that's the page you need or not. So here we have this H1 for the event, and then H2 for what is NHUXPA and the NHUXPA board, meetings and events. And then everything under these H2s is H3, which is good because one common issue is skipping heading levels, which can be confusing because let's say this went from H2 to H5. If you're using a screen reader and you're listening to the heading levels, you might wonder if you're like missing something, if it's because it reads out what the heading level is. So if it suddenly says like, oh, H5, speakers and events, that might throw people off. So it's a best practice to not skip, which we're not doing here. Like we're not skipping, so that's good. One thing that's interesting is I mentioned the H1 should represent the main point of the page. And it's interesting in this case because we're using it for like kind of here's the, as a call out, like here's this event you should pay attention to. So I feel like that it could be, this could be a good H1. It could also be questionable. And that's another thing, like, and I feel like that can be what makes accessibility complicated. It's not really a black and white thing. There's really more nuance than it may seem at first. Like there are a lot of guidelines, and obviously like there are these like they're running some checks where it's like, oh, you have some errors or you have some features. So it may seem like either you're doing something right or you're not, but that's actually not really the case. I would say it's more of an art than a science. And in that way, it relates really well to design because there isn't really one right answer to things. It just depends on what you're doing. And that is often the case with accessibility. So another thing is we are using multiple H1s here, which is not ideal. So that's maybe one thing to fix. It's also interesting that these H1s visually like look different from this, the main H1. And really they should look the same, like if they're all H1s. But overall, I think this is pretty good. So yeah, nice job. I'm gonna go to the next one, which is ensure logical reading order. The reading order for screen reader users should align with the visual order. So this is also, so anything related to structure will be related to like the HTML markup. So this is about like using markup to determine what's primary content and what's secondary content. One example is if you have like a main paragraph, but then you also have like a pull-out quote or something. If you're using a screen reader, does it jump to the pull-out quote or does it finish reading the main content first? Because you would intend probably for like the main content to be read first and then the secondary content. So I think for this one, it's kind of about like testing it. And actually I will, sorry, going back to UXPA. I will try out, I'm sorry, I just turned off the styles. Oh, that's another thing you could do. Like if styles are gone, does the structure still make sense? So that's what this is. But I wanted to turn on a screen reader so you could listen to it. So I'm on a Mac right now, and the built-in screen reader is called VoiceOver. You can get to it from System Preferences. I have it in a shortcut here, but I'll just go through System Preferences. So System Preferences, Accessibility, and there's VoiceOver. There's also other ones like Zoom, which magnifies text. On Windows, there's JAWS and NVDA. I think JAWS has the largest market share out of all of these. But I know from what I've heard, people like VoiceOver, and like they seem to think it's a pretty good experience. Microsoft also has a built-in screen reader called Narrator, which I've not heard good things about, unfortunately. But yeah, so I'll turn on VoiceOver, and you will hear talking, hopefully, unless I muted the speech. At some point. Sometimes it takes a bit. This box that showed up will have like what is going to get read out. There we go.
VoiceOver on Chrome. UXPA, New Hampshire's chapter for the User Experience Professionals Association, Google Chrome, Rowena window. UXPA.
So I think I have this at like 100% speed, like normal speed. If you listen to a demo of like an actual screen reader user, a lot of the time it's like super fast, and it's like, how are they understanding any of this? But I think it's just like, if you use it all the time, you just get used to the speech. Whoa.
Social links.
So that just happened because, oops, sorry, because this Zoom window toolbar thing just like popped out of nowhere, and the screen reader was announcing what was happening, which is good because it's good to know that now there's something on the screen. That's something that needs to be like coded. Whoa. Sorry. Yeah, so that's good, because one of the issues, or pretty common issues, is that like you'll have new content or something appear on the screen, and it doesn't get announced because it's not something that's like built in. Like you need to make sure that it gets announced if there's dynamic content or changing content on the screen. Anyway, I'm getting a little ahead. I just wanted to show like what it might sound like if I were reading this.
New Hampshire's chapter.
So I'm going to, okay. So I'm going to just read a bit of this page by using Control Option right arrow, I believe.
New tab.
Oh.
New tab.
Let me
Search
just get into it.
UXPA link banner. Chrome
Okay.
has new window. You are currently on a link.
If you'd like, you could. Okay, so it says press Control Option Space to click on a link. So that this Control Option is just like the key, the VoiceOver key. If you'd like, you could close your eyes and just listen to what it says for a bit.
Navigation. You are currently in a navigation.
So that's good. It announced that like this is the navigation area.
Skip to content link.
That's great. There's
You
a
are
skip to
currently on a
content link.
To click this link,
And that will come up in one of the other like principles, having a skip to content link to be able to bypass repeated blocks of content. Because like, let's say I went to another page, I don't want to have to go through all of the navigation again, or all of the repeated content again, if I'm just trying to read the main content. So I'm actually going to skip to it.
what is UXPA? You are currently on a heading level 2 in home link.
And looks like what we being NHUXP has defined as the main content is what starts here. So that's interesting to note because like if I were a screen reader user and I used that skip to main content, I might actually miss that like this is here. All right, so I'm over here. I'm just gonna keep going.
Monthly
No, not. Oh god.
view
So now
our
I'm
YouTube
tabbing.
channel. More register link.
And that's another thing, like if I'm tabbing, I should be able to access all the interactive things like links and buttons, and that is happening here.
Group.
So
You
I
are
was,
currently on a group. Networking and
was
monthly
here.
meetings include invited speakers, group discussions, speakers, and events.
I'm gonna go back to that skip link and do it again.
The New Hampshire
Maybe.
User Experience Professional Speakers and Events. NHUXPA. Skip to
There we go.
content. Link. Chrome has new window. What is NHUXPA? You are currently on a heading level 2 inside of web content. Urge you to exit this web area. Kind of a tangential shift up arrow, but I was inspired by a story from New Hampshire's user experience to my college. He was blind, so couldn't read text, but the school uploaded his textbooks into audio files. They got so good at listening to it all, he crushed books at 3x speed. Could you imagine how awesome that skill would be? I'm currently at 1.4x speed on Audible. I think I'm almost there. Calicospula to everyone. Wow.
That's really awesome. Thanks for sharing
That's
that story.
I didn't
It's
think
also-
you'd read that out loud, but yeah.
Yeah, this is a good live demo.
Yeah,
It's almost like I'm checking what features Zoom has, I guess. So
That's
that's
pretty
great.
awesome.
It's reading out the messages because obviously I wouldn't be able to see them if I'm using a screen reader. And it's announcing them as they come up. So that is great. Okay, so I'm on this text and I'm still using the arrow key to navigate. You can also just like read the whole page. I don't know how many people would do that, but I'm just kind of
What
using
is
the arrow
NHU?
keys.
The New Hampshire User Experience Professionals Association, NHUXPA, offers a friendly environment for UX professionals and students to share ideas, network, and learn from one another. Speakers and events. Monthly meetings include networking and discuss. Our meetings provide a host and sponsor hosting a meeting or the NHUXPA board. You are currently on a heading level 2 inside of web content. To Christine Fajardo. Christine Fajardo, Program Director, Twitter account of Christine Fajardo, LinkedIn account of Christine Fajardo, Product Design Lead, Design, Research, and Innovation at Liberty Mutual Insurance. Christine has over 15 years of experience in graphic design and a recent focus in UX design. Group. You are currently on a group.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. So
Christine Fajardo to everyone. Gotta update that.
one thing is that it's mispronouncing her last name, as you can hear. So there could be things like that. And the text you're seeing here is the alternative text for the image. And so it's, as you've heard, it can be used for screen readers. It's also used when you're on like a bad connection. So like if I was in a place with like shoddy internet, then and so you might have seen this sometimes where like the images don't load, but you see some text, and that is the alternative text that's defined. But it was interesting that it also like read the Twitter and LinkedIn icons
Chrome has new window.
like at the same time.
Christine Fajardo program list 2 items. Twitter account of Christine Fajardo. Link. Chrome has new
And
window.
here it's telling you that it's a link, so you can navigate to it. Yeah. All right, let me go back to my slides.
202205.
Oh gosh. Oh yes, okay, so logical reading order. So as I'm using VoiceOver, it was like going in order and not skipping around or or like reading things that would kind of break the main narrative. So that is good. Let me turn this off for now.
VoiceOver off.
You can safely send IAMs now. Thanks. So another topic is contrast. So provide good contrast. And this is color contrast. Be especially careful with shades of orange, yellow, and light gray. Check your contrast levels with our color contrast checker. So this is a really nice tool. The color is probably one that you may be familiar with. Like it comes up a lot when we talk about like designing for accessibility. But I think it's still important to note because there's text contrast and non-text contrast. So for example, let's say I was checking whether this gray of this icon was, never mind, I will not check that. Well, so there's actually a desktop tool that I use that I can use this picker for. So if I do check this icon, then it will tell me whether this color against some background color that I choose is has enough contrast or not. And that's kind of another thing, like colors themselves are not like accessible or inaccessible. It's the ratio between the foreground and background color. So in the, there's different ratios or like contrast ratios that need to be met for normal text versus large text. Normal text is anything, well, large text is anything that is over 24 pixels, or if it's 18 pixels and bold, like this is 18 and bold. So that's considered large text. Normal text is anything like below that. And then, so for this like blue against white, it passes with flying colors. But let's say I made it lighter. That didn't make it lighter. Okay, so when I make it lighter, it starts to fail the different standards, and I can talk about the standards a bit later. But this is kind of like an easy tool to check whether your text has enough contrast or whether your images, or not images, like icons and UI components like buttons have enough contrast. So non-text contrast, like this graphical objects one, has a lower ratio that needs to be met. So for normal text, it's 4.5 to 1. And so, well, for actually just for the AA standard, which is the like less stringent standard, there's A, AA, AAA, and AA is kind of the one that like a lot of companies generally try to meet, and AAA is like this more severe one that can be really hard to meet. So at Liberty, we do strive for AA compliance. Sorry, I didn't actually need to go into such detail about this. But anyway, so as I get to like past 4.5, the AA is now passing. And then also the AAA for large text is passing, because when it's large text, the ratio, I think, is also 4.5. Like it's lower than the normal AAA ratio because it's large. So there's that too. It's like there's color, but there's also text size to consider. And then for graphical objects like buttons, the ratio that needs to be met is 3 to 1. So even as the text contrast fails here, the graphical objects is passing. So this is just an easy tool to check this. Like you definitely don't need to somehow calculate the ratios yourself. You can just put them in here. Don't convey content using only color. Users may override or may not be able to see differences between colors. So one example is if you have an error message and the message is you're indicating that it's an error by making it red, that wouldn't be accessible because if someone has red-green color blindness, then they may not see that it's red. And so in that case, you could provide an icon or some other indication aside from color that hey, this is something you need to pay attention to. Provide text alternatives for non-text content. So this is one we just mentioned when we were looking at Christine's picture with the screen reader. But I have another example actually. So this is including alternative text for images and graphics. And so alternative text is meant to be it should be an equivalent experience or as equivalent as possible to actually seeing the image. And there's that's definitely one area where there's a lot of nuance because just having alt text at all is good, but there may be ways that you could improve the text potentially. One thing you don't need to do is put image of. So for the alt text, the screen reader will know that it's an image already. So it'll say image. I think it says image of, or it depends on the screen reader, but it could say image of. And then if your text here, let's say it was image of puppy, then it would say image of puppy. And so it's just redundant. But I wanted to show you some examples of alt text on this page. So I'm going to bring up the voiceover again.
Banner, quick accessibility menu, group, skip to main content, image, enablement.
Whoop, didn't mean to do that. That's okay.
Skip to
Let me
main
just
content.
go to.
You are current enable open the object replacement character.
That's another topic, but let me go down to. Let's go down to this
Chrome
image.
has new window.
So apply for a guide dog. This one.
A black lap guide dog lays in the grass while wearing their leather guide dog harness. Link. Chrome has new window. Guide
Oops.
dog square. You are zoom.us. Zoom share toolbar window. System dialog. Chrome. Guided DOG. You are currently on a text element inside of web content. Chrome has new window. A black lab puppy runs on leash beside their puppy raiser. The pair are working together in a lush grass park. Link. Puppy raiser square 2. You are.
So this alt text was very descriptive, and I think, of course, they want to evoke how warm and adorable these images are, and so they're using nice descriptive language to explain what's going on, and they're not assuming intent or editorializing, because when you see an image, you don't know the intent of the person or the dog, I suppose. And so you don't want to inject intent into the messages, but they have really nice, kind of lush descriptions, which makes it very appealing, even if you can't actually see the image. So I think this is an example of good alt text. It also depends on context. So the same image could, of course, have different alt text because that's just up to
Christine Fajardo to currently on a link voiceover off.
that's just up to the human to decide. So I mean, this could have just said a black lab, but they said a lot of extra stuff, and they didn't add any extraneous details that weren't relevant to what they wanted to convey. So I think good alt text is succinct, descriptive, and kind of like communicates like the tone and the like meaning that you're going for. Another thing on this site is there's this like accessibility overlay tool. And this is something that has come up a lot recently, maybe not recently, I don't know. So generally these overlays are like not really the best. So before, when there was that skip link, so right now it says skip to content, skip navigation, sitemap. Like it's great that they have these, but then you keep going. I'm going back now. Okay, so there's also this, like open the accessible navigation menu. Like there are all these kind of like redundant skip links, which is confusing. When I first went to the site, I didn't know why it had like 2 skip to main content links. And then I realized it was because some of them were related to this accessibility menu. The reason this overlay type thing could be an issue is I think it's often used as a band-aid to like not actually fix accessibility issues, but it's like, oh, I have this overlay, so there are things you can customize, and so it like seems more accessible. So like it gives you tools to gives the user tools to change things like the text, like contrast, line height. But like, for example, let's say I was changing the contrast. I wanted to try, was it this one? Nope. Okay. So now it's light contrast. There was definitely one, wait, let's do dark contrast again. Oh, invert colors. Okay. So now I've inverted the colors, but like now I just have cursed images because they're just like programmatically inverting things without regard to like what the it should actually look like. So because this is an overlay, it's gonna like work the same way on different sites, and it doesn't take into account like what's actually on the site. So it's if your team or somebody is like contemplating using overlays, it's not really advised in the community. That's just one other thing to point out. Okay, back to my slides. Okay.
Quick question, Rowena, and a time check-in. We're at just over 20 minutes left. Steph had a good question. Did you notice that the screen reader spelled out DOG instead of saying dog? Is that something to keep in mind when using all caps?
That's a great one. Yes, it is, because it's in all caps. And that is one of the reasons not to avoid using all caps when you don't need to, because it will read it as if it's an acronym. Great question.
Thank you. Great response.
Is there no way around that? I'm just kind of thinking about how like just style guidelines and things, and often just kind of using even not using caps for like the aesthetic value, but could be for like functional value to create hierarchy. Is there any way to get around that, or is that just a fact of life?
I guess I would say if you're using it to convey hierarchy, maybe just like use a different way to convey it, or think about how you could use a different way to convey it without using all caps. If it is like words like donate or apply, I think it's pretty safe that it will get read correctly. So there's that. But it's just like hard to guarantee, especially if you've like volunteered with us. Maybe this says volunteer with US or something. So I would say like avoid it if you can. And if it's in the brand guidelines, like if that's something you could challenge, that would be ideal, like if possible. It's up to marketing, I guess, if they like would change it or not. But I think at least raising it could help other people like be aware of it, because I think a lot of people do use it for stylistic reasons or hierarchy reasons, and like that's fine for a sighted user, but it could cause issues with screen reader users.
I'll throw in that all caps are harder to read, so just don't
Yeah,
do it.
right. There's that too visually.
Ends has a good point. Do you do your testing with users? Have you done testing with users that use assistive technology and screen readers? I think is the question.
So for the products I've worked on, unfortunately I have not, but that is something that would be like awesome to do if you're able to. We have a new-ish group at Liberty of people with disabilities who have volunteered to help with testing. And so I have watched and listened to a screen reader user go through like the our Liberty intranet, or at least a couple pages of it. And I think he would also like help out on other projects. But yeah, usually I don't get to, but that's definitely something that I would like to do and that I would recommend everyone to do. And that kind of brings up another point. You don't have to do like everything at once. Even if you start to like, let's say you just focus on like color contrast, that would still be better than like not focusing on anything, because there is a lot here to learn. And again, I'm only covering like kind of basics. So beyond this, there's also just so much information out there, and it's super overwhelming. So I think any bit that you learn and can apply is helpful. And then like you sort of build knowledge from there, and like at some point it becomes more ingrained in your design process. And then maybe you can like advocate for starting like some sort of user group with volunteers who have disabilities, that sort of thing. And then that's some, they end up being like a resource pool that you can tap into. But I think like things kind of build, and if they don't all happen at once, that's like normal and okay, as long as we're still learning and improving. Not to make an excuse for myself not testing with users with disabilities, of course. That's just an area of improvement for me. Use Truetext instead of images of text. That one we talked about. And I know we only have 15 minutes, so I'm going to keep going. Use adequate font size. So that's at least 12 pixels. Remember line length. Don't make lines too long, too short. For readability, 45 to 75 characters per line. And it's not really like a hard guideline, but just like what is too long or too short. That's kind of maybe a unofficial benchmark that you can follow. Links, make sure links are recognizable. Distinguish them from body text using more than just color. So that relates back to that other one about not only using color to convey meaning. So having an underline is helpful. And then speaking of color, like just making sure that links have enough contrast with the background. Include or design keyboard focus indicators. When navigating with the keyboard, the focused item must be visually distinctive. So going back to I'll go back to this. So if I if I tab, and this is another testing method, just like using your keyboard, because there are users who may just use a keyboard and like not a mouse. So for example, if you're a screen reader user, you probably likely don't use a mouse because you would be, if you're using it because you're visually impaired, then you wouldn't see the cursor for the mouse. And so like those users would only use keyboard to navigate. Or they're also like people who just prefer to use keyboard, and you're also helping them out, making their workflow more efficient. So there are focus indicators here. They should also contrast enough with the background. This is something that I think is not met as much as like other contrast things. But like ideally, for example, like this yellow contrasts enough with the black, so that's good. There are cases where people might have turned off the indicator, which is something you can do because it like for design reasons or aesthetic reasons, I should say, it doesn't like look the best, but definitely don't get rid of the focus indicators, even if it's like a gray or something that doesn't show up as much. Like that's still better than having no focus indicator. Links, again, designing a skip to main content link. So that one we saw on both of these sites. Ensure link text makes sense on its own. So avoid click here or other ambiguous text like more or continue that has like low information sent. So I mentioned that you can navigate through headings if you're using a screen reader. You can also just look at, you can also read out all of the links on a page. That's another way somebody might try to figure out what's on a page. So if all the links said like click here or more or something, then that person wouldn't know what they're clicking on. But also this is kind of just a general design guideline. So another place where design and accessibility just match up. Controls. I'm not going to get too deep into most of this. This is where I think it gets pretty confusing. But design usable widgets and controls. So if you have like a dialogue, tooltip, menu, etc., one thing is just to make sure it's keyboard accessible. So when I'm tabbing, can I get to all of these elements? Can I expand the menu items? Can I like navigate to different pages? So that's something you can check. And then for things like carousels, are there arrows? And can I like pause the slideshow if it's like going too fast or if I just don't want it to advance? And that goes into the next one, use animation, video, and audio carefully. So just providing control over media, like pause and play buttons, so that people who are sensitive to motion or may have like information processing disorders can like better read or better experience a page without getting distracted by unnecessary motion. And then for videos and audio, including captions or a transcript when applicable. So when there's audio or video. And then lastly, ensure form controls have descriptive labels, instructions, and error messages. Because that is what will get read to the screen reader. And if there are like inputs without labels, for example, then you can still like add a label for screen readers only. But if you don't add that, then like in the code, but if you don't add it, then it just doesn't tell you what the field is, and it might just say like input or field, or I think it might say like text field, depending on the screen reader. And that is not helpful when somebody's trying to fill out a form and they don't know what the field is that they're supposed to be filling out. So that was everything in this checklist here. I have a couple more slides. So this is just a note about the accessibility guidelines, which I talked about a little before with the colors, but just like high level of what the guidelines are. They explain how to make web content more accessible, and it's developed by the World Wide Web Consortium. It's an international standard. So there are other standards, but I think this one, WCAG, is used the most. And I talked about the 3 levels of conformance. And actually just going to this quickly. So I mentioned that the guidelines can be pretty unwieldy, or I think I did. It's really just this, ironically, inaccessible document that is incredibly long and pretty hard to read. So I don't recommend like just going off and reading this. If you do, that's awesome. But if not, there are a lot of sites out there that, like WebAIM, that try to make this more digestible. And another one of those, oops, sorry. Another one of those is Mozilla, actually. So Mozilla Web Docs. This gives a really good overview of the accessibility guidelines in like more readable, friendly language. And then just kind of like more details about the specific guidelines, the specific guidelines themselves. So what's next? You can test your designs with the tools that I showed. You could try listening to your website or app with a screen reader. I didn't mention that there are also mobile screen readers. So there's also VoiceOver on the iPhone, and on Android there's TalkBack, and these are both built into the systems. And like testing colors interactions like with your keyboard. And this one we've already talked about, research with people with varying accessibility needs. I definitely advocate for that if you are able to do so, because at the end of the day, there's like only so much you can catch with guidelines and with using a screen reader like as a testing tool, because somebody who uses it for real, of course, is still going to have a different experience, and like that's just an experience that that like somebody who's not using those tools like for real will not catch. Another thing I wanted to say is including accessibility in planning work. It's not just up to like the designer to make things accessible. Everyone on the product team has a role, the designer, developer, PO. And it can be hard to prioritize the work if it's not understood like what the actual work is. And so that's what I wanted to share, like from a design perspective, some techniques so that like you can start to point out like what accessibility issues exist and like what work it would be to fix it or like change what you're designing. Stay up to date with the WCAG guidelines, and I had brought up the page for Mozilla. And also just keep learning. Inclusion is ongoing and imperfect. And that's also something I said earlier. It's not like you do one audit and fix all the issues and then you're done. Anytime you add a new feature, anytime you're designing something new, accessibility is just another thing to consider, along with like aesthetics and like general usability. And that's it. I have resources here in this deck. So these are the tools, some of the tools that I shared here, as well as others that I like, and screen readers, and also some videos of So one, a demo of someone using JAWS for Windows, and then also just a fun video from Microsoft on how a screen reader user might navigate, and then some more learning materials. And I'm sorry I talked for so long. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Rowena. That was really helpful. Thank you so much. Great amount of information. We're getting some love in the chat as well. Might have time for a question or two. If anyone has some questions or comments, feel free to drop in the chat or come off mute.
I was wondering, Rowena, do you think we could maybe get the last couple of slides that you shared, the resources, and maybe we could put them in our chat, our Slack groups, so people can, have the links and have access to them, because it seems like there's a lot of great learning tools there.
Definitely, yeah.
And I'm just going to share my screen that has our next meetings up so that it can be up as we're chatting. I dropped a couple of the links when I caught them in the chat, so those are in there for a start, but that would be really great. Emily had a good question. How do screen readers deal with a customer service pop-up, that chat with us pop-up?
Good question. So it depends on how it was coded, but what should happen is, like, if there is a message, then it should get announced. It might interrupt what it was already reading if it was reading something. There are different like settings for that. But yeah, you can kind of, it should announce it, but it might not, or it might interrupt, or it might not interrupt. Like, it kind of depends on how it was implemented.
Allison, Rowena, from your experience, what is one of the more difficult parts of improving the accessibility of a site?
Difficult. I think maybe just prioritizing the work, because I feel like actually doing the work isn't too bad. And from like a development perspective, actually a lot of things are not too hard to fix, like if you understand what needs to be fixed. That's not for everything, but a lot of things are pretty easy. But if these issues are not raised and not prioritized, then they'll just like sit there forever. And
The
then
second
what is
part.
the easy part?
Yeah.
I think, maybe just like, I feel like designing for accessibility, like once you are aware of the guidelines, it's hard not to think about them when designing. So like, for instance, for these slides, I was using like a Google template, but I had to change some of the colors because they weren't accessible. And also because I didn't want to just use the template, but I intentionally chose colors that would contrast. So I feel like because I'm always thinking about that, it's not hard for me to, but it is just something that you need to just have awareness of.
Allison followed up, easier to do from scratch, harder to clean up, which I think is, yep, a very good point. If your design elements are accessible from the start, you don't have to try to fix them afterwards.
Yeah.
And also just say, like, when you're cleaning it up, it also means that there are more people that already have their hands on the product. So it means there's more people to be like, oh, like, should that be a header? And it's yeah. So I thank you, Rowena.
Thanks for the question.
Can I squeeze one more in, Julia? I was wondering, Rowena, if you could tell us about the modal, and how to work correctly with a modal, if at all.
Yeah. I think keyboard accessibility is big for modals, because sometimes it's implemented in a way that like the focus doesn't go to the modal, and as you're tabbing, it may seem like you're not actually getting anywhere. but the problem might be that you're actually still tabbing on the page behind the modal. So I've seen that happen. I think also when use a screen reader, sometimes like a modal can open, but then you don't hear anything get read. And so you don't know that the modal is opened. So like that's also something to watch out for, like just making sure that that gets announced because now something on the page has changed. I feel like those are big things. So yes, like modals are fine. It's just that like anytime you use a modal, those are kind of the things to worry about.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
And Freddie was just asking, Rowena, have you seen the screen audit checklist from WCAG?
Good question. I don't think so.
I think it's like the.
Yeah, I have done a little bit of work on that side for our website, and something that helped me, even though yes, it's a lot of work. And yes, once you look at it, you cannot get your head, when out of it once you start designing. But there is a checklist with descriptions on everything and where you will find it.
Actually, I might know what you're talking about.
And I cannot find it. I have the template that I did, and with what I did and how, and all those details, but I cannot find where the empty one is. Like, yeah.
I just linked to one that's on the Yale site as well, but I think it's might not be the one you're talking about.
It looks something like that, but yeah. Anyway, but point is that yeah, if you can find the checklist for anyone who wants to do any of that work, it really helps because it tells you where to find every details. Even you open the developer tools, it tells you all the alt text and tells you all those details, and you can check against that, with whatever you're working on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Rowena just.
Oh, sorry.
Rowena just shared a link to W3, and there's a link for evaluation resources, and I think there's some really helpful lists and information in that link, so definitely check that out.
Yeah, I also put that in the resources in the slide.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you so much, Rowena. And I think you've given everyone a lot to think about and try to bring forward in their work and their discussions and how they think about their work. So good job.
Thanks so much for having me. And thanks everyone for participating and being engaged.
Thank you. This was very practical. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Awesome. And we'll look forward to sharing more of those resources. And Cal shared our links to Slack, and we have an accessibility channel in there, which we would love to see more active with resources, ideas, and all things accessibility. So come and join us. All right, and we are off next month, but then in July, we have a presentation from Charlie Lepomardo about user interviews. And in August, we're going to do a discussion for junior and aspiring UXers. So make sure to bring your friends for that one. All right, have a great June, and we will see you in July. And thank you again, Rowena.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
So.
Bye, Julia.
Bye.
See ya. Thank you.